In this video, I'm going to talk about setting up my first quad in beta flight, a little bit of PID tuning, and how I like the Goggles X compared to the DJI Goggles 2. For those just tuning in, this is a part 2 continuation of the first video that I made titled From DJI to Walksnail, where essentially I went over the parts list that I used to build my first quad. So if you haven't seen that yet, make sure you go check that out. So yeah, round 2. Let's get it. Okay, look, I have a question for you. Have you ever built a drone, thought you've double checked everything in beta flight, so you take it outside and you just want to see if the thing can get off the ground at all, and you arm it, you throttle up, and nothing happens at all except a loud, screeching, weird, scary noise? Yeah, it sucks. And that's exactly what happened to me. Which is why I want you to learn from my mistakes. So what exactly happened? If you're thinking the props were on incorrectly, you're actually wrong this time. And even though that's the most common reason why this usually happens, in my case, it was actually because a motor was spinning in the wrong direction, which is actually the second most common reason why your drone won't get off the ground, or why it may flip out or do something crazy whenever you try to throttle up. I think this happened because once I had everything soldered up to the board, I actually decided to retrim and resolder the wires back to the flight controller because the soldering just sucked the first time. The thing is, when I wired them back, I swapped them, and according to Reddit and Google, this reverses motor direction, and I had no idea. Now, there's 3 different ways we can fix this. The first being BLHeli32 or whatever you use to make modifications to your ESC. Just a quick note, you can no longer update the firmware on your ESC now that BLHeli32 has stopped production. However, you can still use your ESC just fine and customize your settings. They've kind of just dropped us off a cliff and it sucks, but it is what it is. The recommended software at this point is AM32, and I've also seen some people mention Escape32 as well, but I'm not familiar with it enough to give a solid opinion on it. The second is the Motors tab in beta flight, and the third is doing what I did to mess everything up, swapping the motor wires. BLHeli32 is a closed source software that's going to allow you to make modifications to the parameters of your ESC if it's compatible. We can set the ramp up power, we can set the max throttle, we can set the PWM frequency, we can change the motor direction, we can change the startup beat volume, we can do a lot of different things in this configuration software. What you need to do first is take off your propellers and check to see if your ESC is compatible with BLHeli32. And then you want to download the BLHeli32 suite. The next thing that you want to do is plug in a LiPo battery to your drone and plug in a USB connector from your drone to your computer. Make sure you have some sort of desk fan as well to blow in your drone to prevent any overheating. Open the software up, click the connect button, and then click read setup. Once it reads your ESC, it's going to show you the configuration that's currently been applied to it. It's all going to be default. From this point, you need to make sure that you're running the appropriate firmware. If you do need updated firmware, you're in luck. There's a ESC flash section where you can go and make that happen. But what we want to look for here is the motor tab, which is going to be in the first row, I believe, and you're going to want to change that from normal to reversed, or you're going to want to change it from reversed to normal, depending on what it's currently set at. Once you do that, all you have to do is hit right setup, and then the configuration is saved on your ESC. And a quick note here, I've been reading a lot of forums about PWM filtering and having it set to by RPM, and a lot of people say it's actually killed their ESC, so I don't have that set. If you're wondering what that is, I have mine set to 48 kilohertz on low and high. It offers a great balance between torque and efficiency. You can also do 24 kilohertz as well, which is of course going to give you more torque, but your battery life is going to be a little bit shorter from my understanding. So read up on that, make sure you understand what you're doing there, because if not, you could potentially fry your shit. So take note of that. The second method here is beta flight, and it is by far the easiest method and the one that I use to fix my problem. And keep in mind, I am on version 4.5, although this still should work for versions 4.4 and 4.3 if you're running any of those. All you have to do is take off your propellers and go to the Motors tab. Once you're in the Motors tab, just go to the Motor Direction sub-tab. It's going to be right there in your face, and you're going to want to click that you want to change your motors individually. And once you do that, you just select the motor that you want to change, and it'll just spin in the opposite direction, and it's literally that easy. The last and the most tedious thing that we could do here is swap 2 of the motor wires. And it doesn't matter which motor wires you swap, as long as they're swapped. There's also a guide detailing each of these methods written by Oscar Laing, and I'll post that in the description box below so that you can take a look at that whenever you get some free time if you want to refer back to anything. Now that I can finally get off the ground, it was time to do some PID tuning. And I had no idea how long tuning a drone could actually take, especially if you have no experience in doing it. But before I could actually modify any settings, I had to do 2 different things. I had to apply a filtering preset, and I had to apply a ELRS preset. Make sure you match the ELRS preset in beta flight to the packet rate of your radios. For example, mine is 250 megahertz, so I matched that to the beta flight preset of 250 megahertz. And you can figure out exactly what packet rate you're running by going to the Lewis script on your radio. It should be the first line. And what this ELRS setting is going to do is essentially define your feed forward settings, and it's going to define your smoothing as well. And it's basically going to make your RC link to your drone that much better. Once I had that done, it was time to start PID tuning. And again, I didn't know shit about PID tuning. So to get this done, I had to use a combination of 3 different sources. Chris Rosser, Bruce FPV from Rotor Riot, who did a video about 2 years ago on tuning, and the man, the myth, the legend, Brian from PID Toolbox. Clap it up. He's great. Thank you. Thank you so much. And to be honest, they might as well be talking in French sometimes. A lot of what they say goes right over my head, but I appreciate them, and I managed to get a solid tune. Make sure you actually have time to PID tune, because if you have no idea how to fly line of sight, or you're running back and forth to the computer or looking at your phone for a YouTube video, it could potentially take you several hours in the afternoon, like it did me. I'm actually really bad at flying line of sight.
1 hour later.
Alright, so I've made it all the way to feed forward. And I think I'm getting better at hovering.
A few moments later.
Yeah. Nah, I'm ass.
3 hours later.
Can you move it along? I'm all out of time cards.
So much later that the old narrator got tired of waiting and they had to hire a new one.
And even though it's called the basement tuning method, I'd recommend that you tune outside in angle mode. It's going to make it way easier to hover while you're doing aggressive stick movements as you're gathering data from each 15-second or so flight. And if you want to get a PID tuning workflow going so that you know what sliders to modify and by how much each and every 15-second flight that you do, I'll leave a few videos in the description box below that help me a ton. And keep in mind that as you're watching these videos, you may see somebody tune a quad one way, and then you may see somebody tune a quad another way. There's a ton of theory about how tuning is actually done and exactly what you need to do and modify. So don't get discouraged if you see one person do something different than the other. But it really just depends on how you want the quad to feel. So just find what works for you, or find someone to explain it to you like you're a toddler, like I had to do. But yeah. It took me about 4 days to get a decent tune on my quad, but I think that if I wanted to tune it further, I probably could. I just need to actually sit down and dive deeper into the information. And being that I have a 1-year-old, I have very limited time on my hands, so I don't know if that's possible or not at the moment. It's a little confusing understanding what each filter does as you're adjusting them. Outside of just looking at black box data, you really have to understand what a nicely tuned quad sounds like, which can be really difficult if you're new to doing this. But you gotta start somewhere, so don't be afraid if your drone goes up in flames. You know, it'd really be cool if somebody created a software that integrated AI and machine learning that gave you values to the T that your quad would need for optimal performance. I wonder how many trained data sets that would take to make that happen. Like, if you could opt in to some sort of program where you submitted your flight diagnostics, right? Where you submitted the frame that you have, or where you submitted the motors that you're running into some sort of data lake that kind of took that information and parsed it out into different categories. I think that'd be pretty dope. And based off of that, it could give you a recommended PID tuning setting or a recommended filter setting that you could go through and change to whatever you see fit. I guess it'd be kind of like how the NVIDIA GeForce software can give you recommended game settings based off of the hardware specifications that you have. Or maybe that's already a thing. I don't know, just a thought. Send it to Chris Rosser. Anyway, the most exciting part of the process of building for me was being able to finally use my Walksnail Goggles X. I've done my fair share of tuning flights with them, and so far they've lived up to the hype. I really like the look and the quality of the headset, and they actually fit my face really good. They're not too heavy on my face at all, and I think I managed to get a revised version of the Goggles X with the new heatsink in it because I haven't had any overheating issues, and upon doing my research prior to purchasing them, that was a very big issue. I am debating on whether I should get the patch antennas or not, but I haven't had any connection issues so far, and I don't see myself flying long range, at least for like another few months until I get bored and build a larger drone to do so. So that's really not an issue right now. Hopefully these goggles save my pockets, man. Walksnail drones are a lot cheaper than DJI drones, and on top of that, I can fly tiny whoops, a bunch of tiny whoops, and I don't have to worry about the extra weight of the O3 air unit on there or worry about damaging the O3 air unit because of how expensive it is. So as long as they continue to keep pushing out good updates, your boy will be a customer. Now, what do I not like about the goggles? For starters, the fans are pretty loud and they do take longer to boot up to the OSD than the goggles too, which is not a big deal, but it is worth mentioning if you are very concerned about those things. I do get a little bit of light leak at the top as well up here, but so far it hasn't been an issue when I fly. I really can't notice it at all. I did keep getting random black screens, and from doing my research, it had to do with the proximity sensor and it not being calibrated correctly. So there's two things you can do to fix this. You can either 1, recalibrate the proximity sensor, or 2, just disable it. The easiest thing to do is to just disable the proximity sensor, and that's exactly what I did, and I haven't had any issues since. This is a known issue. Apparently it was supposed to be fixed in a firmware update. However, mine still experienced it, and I'm on the latest firmware, but it's just a proximity sensor. You really don't need it anyway, so just disable it, save yourself the headache, and move on with your life. I've also been seeing things about the Goggles X experiencing freezing, so the easiest way to fix this is to replace the thermal paste under the heatsink and clean off the excess silicone grease. That should be fixed with the newer versions being shipped out. As I stated, I haven't had any overheating issues so far, but I will leave a link to the Reddit discussion below that kind of shares the interaction between Walksnail support and someone who purchased the goggles and what they told them to do in order to fix it. Overall, I do like them and I do enjoy the picture quality that I get. I'm on 1080p and I haven't had any issues at all. They're also going to be releasing an app in the future that's going to give you the ability to do things like change the firmware of the goggles and stream and do other cool things that I'm really excited about, as well as just changing out the VRX of the goggles to upgrade them. Or so they say. We'll see if that actually happens, and if so, how long it's supported before they just make you buy a brand new pair of goggles altogether, because these companies want their money, dog. As for the Walksnail Moonlight, it's great. However, I do notice that there is a little bit more saturation to the footage, much like every other reviewer has stated, in comparison to the DJI-03 Air unit. I have my settings set to default, but if this does annoy you, you can change this in the settings. The footage is still pretty either way. Alright, so we are at the park right now, and it is a beautiful day. It's about 70, 75, 76 degrees, something like that. It's been raining the past week, so pretty excited to get out here, man. Yeah, let's see what it do. So I guess fun time is going to have to continue when I buy a new motor, because for some reason this is bent right here. Well, I know why it's bent, but it's not spinning. And I cleaned out the motor bell. I don't know. I may go home and see if I see anything else in the motor bell, because it's just locked up. But so far I've cleaned everything out, and I don't know, but yeah, looks like I'm gonna need a new motor. And so after troubleshooting the drone for a while, I came across a video suggesting the shaft of the motor bell could be bent, and to use pliers to bend it back. I used a hammer and rotated the bell back to the point I felt resistance, took the bell off, and smacked it back to the center, and the bell wasn't locked anymore. Afterward, it started to spin just fine. The next issue I had to take care of were the motor wires somehow getting cut. All I had to do for this was first clean the motor wire with some rubbing alcohol and get the mud from in between the magnets with a Q-tip. Pretty simple stuff here. Just make sure you use 90% alcohol or better. After that, I cut the heat shrink off and cut the motor wires at the point they got sliced. I trimmed the wire and resoldered replacement wires back on. All in all, this took about an hour and a half to do, but after it was all said and done, the motor was fine and worked perfectly. If you're building, make sure you keep the motor wire trimmings, because they will come in handy at some point. And the last thing you want to do is get caught with your pants down with no motor stuck inside. In fact, When you start building, it's a really good idea to keep almost all of your trimmings, not just your motor wires. Just throw them in a baggie and stuff it in a drawer somewhere and forget about it until the day you need them. Trust me. Oh, and another thing, if it's in the budget, buy extra motors. I actually got lucky my motor wasn't damaged too badly to the point of no repair, because I definitely did not have a spare to use. And I actually had to rush order one just in case it wasn't functional to get this video done. So yeah, don't be like me. Do the right thing. Spend the extra money. You'll be glad you went ahead and did it in the long run, and I can promise you that if you don't learn anything else from me. Now, I do think the footage from the camera would fare better with an ND16. Sometimes I feel the ND8 it ships with just doesn't expose the image the way I'd like. I like my footage a little bit warmer with a little less exposure, and you can see from the video here on screen it's just really bright, which is okay if I'm flying later in the afternoon, but not really ideal for early afternoon or midday situations. If you're familiar with ND filters, then this is a no-brainer for you, but if you don't know, ND filters essentially act as shades for your camera, with each multiple of 2 being darker than the previous. And they're used based on different lighting conditions during the day and how you want your footage to look, yada yada yada. It gets deep, but that's the high level explanation. But after getting an ND16 ordered, I can confirm that previous assumption. The picture looks way better in my opinion, and this is with the default exposure value and sharpness settings. I think I'll be running the ND16 permanently now, or at least for the majority of my flying. On another note, I am having issues with every third file or so on my SD card being corrupted for some reason. I'm not sure why. This doesn't happen on my O3 Air unit, and I use the exact same type of SD card, but I'm gonna do more research and figure out what the problem might be. And by the way, this doesn't happen with my Goggles X at all, but hopefully the Moonlight isn't defective, because that would be a huge disappointment considering how much I actually like the thing, so fingers crossed. So about the low light footage, I don't think it's going to be anything that I post as freestyle content other than right now. It's more so just for me to be able to fly at hours I would normally be packing things up. It's good though, and definitely an improvement over the O3 for sure. And you can't really tell in the video here, but it's actually getting really dark outside, or darker than I would normally fly with an O3. I'm not gonna oversell the thing, but the park lights are on and I would be home because it's summer and I hate mosquitoes. I didn't have 3D&R on, but it is something I'm going to try. Apparently it's supposed to reduce noise, color mixture errors, and was developed for shooting in dark conditions. So we'll give it a try and see what happens, because that very late afternoon footage you just saw was a little bit noisy. There's also 2D&R, which reduces noise in video footage as well, but the mechanism behind how it's doing it is very different. 2D&R uses temporal noise reduction versus 3D&R, which uses spatial noise reduction. To keep it simple, without getting into any of the overcomplicated specifics, 3D&R is usually the better option for footage shot in low light conditions, so definitely keep that in mind. Now, there are a few things that I feel could be better. Which brings me to the downsides of having the Walksnail Moonlight. At the moment, you pretty much have to buy the camera in a kit. There is no way to purchase the camera individually if it breaks. They do sell ND filters as well. They sell ND8s, ND16s, and ND32s. However, Caddx is the only place that you can purchase them right now, which leads me to the next thing. If you do break it, you're probably going to have to wait about a week and a half in order to get it shipped to you, because it's coming from China, so make sure you plan accordingly. So as a beginner, can you skip DJI and go straight to Walksnail? I'd say yes. Walksnail has damn near everything that you would need outside of a flat color profile and super low latency if you're into racing. And if you're just starting out, I highly doubt you're going to care about those things anyway. And again, you'll also save money because bind and fly drones for Walksnail are a lot cheaper, and on top of that, you'll have a whole new world of tiny whoops that you can explore and fly. But if you want the best video system out there, it's going to be DJI. They have the resources and the manpower and the money to keep consistently giving you great product. And it'll probably be that way for a while. The only thing is going with DJI, you're most likely going to be stuck in this upgrade loop. of not being able to use older equipment with newer equipment, vice versa. Like for example, none of the new DJI Avata 2 goggles or the controller is backwards compatible with the DJI Avata 1, at least at the time of me filming this video. So there it is. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you have Walksnail, how are you liking it compared to other systems? If you have advice about the Walksnail system, please let me know. I'm an open book. Thanks for watching, guys. Like and subscribe. Catch you later.